Hey guys, what's up? It's Alex from My Custom Hotwheels. Peace. Here with another how-to episode. A couple of how-to guides today in one. Today what we're going to be doing is teaching you guys how to cut out a bonnet perfectly so that you can actually use the same bonnet. And then also we'll be looking at how to hinge the bonnet as so. And created a couple of really cool hinging methods. Obviously different because this R32 has nothing at the bottom of the windscreen with which to pivot it to, so we'll look at that later. So first things first, as with anything, tools are crucial. Now in this particular case, the tools are so crucial that it wasn't until I found this tool that I was able to even do this stuff. Beforehand, I would always use my trusty jeweler's hacksaw, but obviously with this thing, there's certain aspects of it you can't turn directions, you can't get into certain places because of the fact that you've got this big contraption around you. But I digress. So today what we're going to be using is this fantastic little thing called an Excel saw blade number 13. So that's what you need to buy. Excel is a brand, I've cut it off the top, but it's number 13 saw blade, and it goes into your X-Acto knife as so, and what you have now is complete power. I'd actually recommend even using this over everything else. I don't even use my jeweler's hacksaw anymore. But basically follow me, and what we're going to do is go through the process of cutting out a bonnet. It's fairly straightforward once you have the right tool. As you can see, you're probably watching this going, holy shit, I so need one of those. I can see exactly how to cut out the bonnet. I don't even need to watch the rest of this video. And cool, enjoy. For the rest of you guys, this is basically what we need to do. So preparation wise, apart from this tool, we need some precision needle files. I bought these on eBay for like $5. Easy to find at most hobby stores, but always use a little flat one and I like this little square one. It's great for getting really tight little right angles, which I use, for example, when I'm filing it afterwards to get that really nice tight line so the bonnet sits perfectly. But we'll get to that. And the other thing you need is just some normal masking tape for preparation, and random, but a block of wood or a little container, or basically something so that you can put the container on the table, put your car up here, and you can cut, and you've now got more of an angle up and down, as opposed to obviously on the table you got nothing to work with, flat on the table. So there's your tools. Next step is preparation. Now we're going to be cutting out two bonnets today. We're going to be cutting out an R32 Skyline bonnet and also a Datsun 510. Datsun 510 is a lot easier because half the work's done for us. The front of the bonnet doesn't exist. Obviously the back does, and you could say the same for the Skyline, but the Skyline's a lot trickier because we've got to figure out a way to get under this grille and over the headlights without, basically figure out how to take the bonnet off without taking the front of the car off at the same time, which I've successfully managed to do here as much as can be done really. If you see, I'll try and get the focus going there. Someone's got the shakes. Here we go. So, preparation. Take your masking tape, and for the Skyline, where we're going to be cutting, quite simply, we're going to be cutting along the front here. Therefore, our blade might occasionally go off to the side. So I've taped up here. And again, when we're running up the side here, we don't want to go and cut into the A-pillar, bottom or side, accidentally. So I've taped up there as well. What I've also done, I should have waited till the video to do it, but the very first cuts you want to do, I'll show you with my old one. Obviously, this is almost perfect, but if you have a look here at the bottom of the windscreen, I've cut into the side ever so slightly. Didn't really on the other side, but this side I have, and it bugs me. I like precision and perfection. So what I realized I did wrong there is when I get to the end of the bonnet, there's a slight turn in, and obviously you can't really turn in once you're obviously going straight. So what I did this time around was your very first cuts are to go down here and down there, and you can actually see when you hold in the car the line of the bonnet, and so just follow the line of the bonnet. A trick is to make sure as well, you start at this angle, but very quickly make sure you go straight down, otherwise you will of course end up cutting into this part of the car, and then you've stuffed yourself and you have to start again. So make sure you always cut straight down so that your cuts are actually straight down with the car, the line of the panel that you're cutting. So let's get into it. So as you see, I've taped up here. I've also made sure that the tape is pushed firm up against the window because I want to be going that way. Maybe I'll come back the other way sometimes, but I want to be able to have movement through that windscreen. It's not the case with the Datsun. We'll go through that in a second, but obviously it's not the case there, so I've taped up that windscreen and made sure that I've protected the two corners at the back, which are the main issues of contentions when you're cutting the Datsun 510 sedan, or wagon, I guess. So, let's get cutting. First steps. Now, again, people would say, oh, do you use a vise or anything like that? Now, my only retort to that is no, you don't use a vise, because every time you want to move the car in a different position, you have to take it out of the vise, find a new way to hold it. Hopefully you don't crush the car or damage it or squeeze it too tight that you bend the casting and then you buggered yourself anyway. So at the end of the day, it's just easier to hold it in your hand and work away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the first cut here, then I'm going to pause the video, and once I finish that part, and then we'll go to the next section. So important part for this is your first incision needs to be, far out, I can't hold anything straight, quite literally just resting between the first grill and the bonnet, and then to make sure that you cut straight ahead. And again, what I've said, the best thing to do here, your first cut is to cut straight ahead. You see the shape of the car, because it makes almost a U shape. Cut like that until the blade reaches almost that point underneath, and then stop. And then we'll come back and we'll show you the next section of the cut. Missed the pause button. Okay, you only actually want to, I hope you're watching the video and not pausing it and going ahead. You actually only want to go in, if you can see how much the blade's gone in there, it's gone in hardly anything. I've actually gone and just started to nick that headlight there. So when that happens, that's obviously you want to stop at that point. So you can focus in, you can see I've just started to nick this headlight here. It's only just a surface scratch, so it's fine. Now here's where the fun trick goes. What you want to do is work one side at a time, and although this is a solid blade, it's actually quite malleable. So it bends quite a bit. So what you want to do is work with that bend. And what I do there is actually come in at this angle and then cut up along above the headlight, and just do that as a straight line again. So that's another straight line you're doing very delicately. Again, this is all delicate work, because at the end of the day you don't want that saw blade going over the top onto that front section here and cutting this here. You basically, so once you've done that line there, you do the same thing that you did at the front, and then I do the same thing on this side here. Obviously turn the car around, because you want to be able to work like that. Find that line above that headlight, beautiful line, you can see it there, and start cutting there. And once I have enough of an incision that goes in a U shape almost at the front, I can then go from side to side, and the blade will actually bend with that cut. And the only thing I need to again stress is to make sure that you are aware at all times where your blade is, both at this end and at the point, because you don't want to go getting excited and cutting straight across into here. So you want to make sure you stop there, because that's when the fun begins. Because once we've done that, we then obviously we turn the car around and we cut straight down here. And that's a fairly straightforward cut. And the only thing I need to stress here is to make sure that, one, you're going perpendicular or straight down to the vehicle. You don't ever sort of forget and start going at that angle or anything like that. You'll be in real trouble then. Just make sure you're going straight down at all time. And again, always be conscious of the front of your blade and the back of your blade, so that you're not going too far down into the headlight, or you don't cut up into your A-pillar here. Fairly straightforward. Again, I'll pause the video and let me do some of this cutting so we can get a bit further into it. Just unpause it for a while, I'll do just a bit of in on the action. So you can see that I've created now almost a bending cut. And the good thing is now when I get in here, you have to keep it down on this angle, so you have to go from here, sorry. But I can now cut across here. You're going to work for me? You're going to make it look stupid. You know what it's like when you take the blade out. So I can now cut, and the blade is naturally actually bending up slightly. As long as I'm conscious of the fact that I don't go into the actual side of the car, I can do that. And now I'll start bending around this way. And I can just keep doing that until both the front and the back of the blade can't go any further in terms of they'll start cutting the wrong places. Should get my hand out of the way. So I can just keep doing that. You can see we've starting to have an impact. You can see it's actually going up above the headlight perfectly, down and then across flat. And now let me do the other side, so let me pause it. Okay, now we have, as you can see, this is sort of the end of the first stage of cutting. We've kind of managed to cut a nice sort of curling line across the front of the bonnet that goes straight in, follows the line, but more importantly, as I said, I've always made sure to maintain a directly straight line in. I actually forgot, funnily enough, so I'm glad that's why I'm reiterating it, because when I was doing it here, I sort of started going down at this angle, because it's a natural sort of thought to go down because you're at an angle. I sort of remembered, it went, hang on, it needs to tilt up that way. In fact, you can see the blade goes in nicely that way because of that fact, but it should be cutting like that. Now, when you get to this point where you're really close to the end, see how I'm probably 0.5 millimeter off both ends. Actually, this end I'm almost touching, I've almost nailed it. But what you want to do here, to give yourself an extra little buffer, and when I say little, I'm talking like 1 millimeter buffer, is you want to start your cut lines across this way. So obviously quite simple, there is a slight curve in the bonnet, so you want to follow that in terms of just nice and even. Just stay quite flat here. I'm trying to get your focus onto that. So you try and stay quite flat here, and sort of, and then now if I keep going this way, I'll cut across that way. I'll cut straight across the front of the car because of that slight curve. So then, when you get to the other bit of the curve, just let the front of the blade steer, because it will. Just push the front of the blade in and see how it steers up. Probably can't see, but the front of the blade is actually steering beautifully along the line of that bonnet, and I'm just going to do that a few times until all the paint's gone, until there's a nice sort of etching in there. And in fact, what I'm doing right now is how you cut the last stages of the bonnet when you've got no room left, in terms of you can't go that way. So if you've got to cut a very solid line, in fact, even though we're not cutting the Datsun 510 now, this is a point for the Datsun 510, because you've got to when you get to the end of this line here, you've got such a solid L that you've got to stop at. You can't go any further. The only way you can cut that is to cut really thin lines like this, and just keep going like that until part of the blade breaks through, and then you can push the blade through and cut normally straight up and down. But until then, sometimes the only way to make that initial cut through is just to go like this, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until you break through. But in this case, what we're doing, I'm digressing, is what we want to do is we want to cut just that front section of the bonnet here, just that, and and again, always stop and check. Right? Even though you think you haven't gone far enough, which I haven't, still check anyway, because it's amazing how quickly you can go from not far enough to, oh shit, start again. So again, you know what, that's probably far enough. I haven't even gone that far, but it gives you an idea that you really don't need much. So you can see there's just enough of a mark there, but that is now the start, and that will now prevent me, hopefully, as long as I'm careful, from overcutting, and it'll allow me now within the framework of that bonnet to cut that out nice and neatly, and then use those files to neaten up the lines so that the bonnet can sit back in again. So I'm again going to pause the video while I do the last final touches. You know what I'll do is I'll do the other side so you can see it from start to finish. You can see this steering I'm talking about. So now I'm sort of holding it more for the camera, and it's still, and no matter which way, whether I push it or pull it, it will always follow the line. So just keep that in mind. It's a great little tool like that. The nose will steer. Unlike I don't know if you're experienced with using the jeweler's hacksaw, you'll know full well that trying to cut a straight line in that, it's like doing a drunk man do a sobriety test. It just ducks and weaves all over the place. It's got a mind of its own. It's really hard to maintain a straight line with a jeweler's hacksaw, but with this thing, it's just beautifully easy. So I've now done that, and then what I'll do is put the car down. Again, you can see I'm using my little container. It's a great little friend for you. Probably put that tape a bit close. Again, so start at that angle there at the front, only lightly, and then very quickly I go to almost a flat angle so that I'm cutting down across the bonnet, not into the front. Check. As you can see, I haven't been cutting for that long, but I'm already deep enough. So as I said, be very careful, because you can very quickly just go too deep and it's all over. So even though this video's already been going for 16 minutes, I'll pause it now just to save a bit of more time and come back to us when we cut a bit more of this out. But I'll keep you guys looking in as I progress. Now, basically I've started to come through. The front line is now perfectly going from one end to the other. I can actually see it starting to break through the other side now. See the line there, the front, which is good. I've also sort of made the sides a bit deeper, and I've now got quite a precise sort of framework with which to work with. Now, basically what I'm doing now is I'm constantly rocking to and fro. I'm going this side here, down along here. Now that, as I was mentioning about this blade, it is now naturally curving. It's now naturally curving, which is pretty awesome. So I'm cutting, and as I cut this way, as soon as I see that blade start to go near that front side fender, I go, oop, and I go back this way, and I sort of go a bit deeper that way. And obviously, as you can see, if I'm cutting at that angle, it'll get to a point where I'm cutting perfectly that fender perfectly the front of the bonnet without actually touching the fender, because of the angle I'm coming in at there. As opposed to obviously that way, I'm going to cut the fender, but keep working deeper and deeper that way. And then I'm going to come through, and then obviously, once the blade goes through, I can then turn it straight in and cut. And that's what you want to do. Once you get the blade right through the front, you want to turn it sideways inside and cut until you're level there. Take it out, turn it around this way obviously, and cut until you're level there. And then you can cut down. You know that as long as you keep cutting down, the bonnet will basically fall off when it gets to the line that you already made. So you keep cutting along there. I'm almost to the point where I can't go any further, as you can see, without cutting into the bonnet. So I'm now actually going to do exactly as I mentioned, and hopefully it will go through. There we go. So now it goes in. So now what I'll do is I'm just going to cut like this. Oh. Okay. And I'm going to keep cutting now. I'm going to be a while for this one because I have to cut that out. That's part of the fun, but I mean, you don't have to, but it's going to be a lot harder to try and cut around it. But I prefer to cut it off anyway, because when you're dealing with the bonnet, you don't want to have a big thing sticking out, do you? So, alright, I'm going to pause it again while I deal with this. Okay, I've now dealt with that rivet. So, we're at the finishing touches basically. We've already cut through and we've already explained everything I need to explain. So we can now put the blade in, as I said. The rivet's out of the way. So now what we can do is just, you see it there? Yep. It's just cut. Again, this is why it's easier to not have the car in a vise, because you know what it's like when you try to cut the different direction to what you've previously been cutting, and the blade pieces try to grab every second. So what I'm actually going to do is, even though you obviously can't see it, is I'm actually going to put it in my lap and hold the car and sort of move the car more than I move the saw, and it actually makes it easier. Whatever way you find works, the fact is if you're holding it, you've got a lot more maneuverability, and you can then sort of cut away. So again, since you're not watching anything, so I've gone almost to the other side. Again, what I'll do is here, I'll cut in from this side. Should be easy to do. Again, you want to try and go as straight as possible, obviously, because then when you get to the end, you're actually going to have a nice straight cut without cutting into anything. So I'll pause it there and just unpause it one more time for the finishing touches and quickly explain the Datsun bonnet. I'm not going to go through cutting that out because that would be another 20 minutes, obviously. But I'll explain some of the sort of main things you need to keep in mind, because obviously one bonnet, the same bonnet. Once you understand how to use the tool and get a bit of practice, then sky's the limit. Hang on a sec, guys, be back. Yeah. The final piece I'm actually going to do is combine the how to cut the Datsun bonnet out with the remainder of this one, because in all my excitement of cutting the front section out, I realised that we haven't actually finished cutting the sides. That's going to take a bit longer too. So, no one said this was going to be easy. So the only trick here, this is the same trick. I'll explain it on here, then I'll continue a bit on this car, and then we'll end there. So, and then stay tuned for the next part where we actually hinge these bloody bonnets. So, this line here, it's got a slight curve in it, that's fine. Again, this knife is your friend, it will always follow the curve, as long as you're firm but gentle. That's what she said. Now, what you want to do here is the same thing we're going to do on the sides here, is you've got nowhere to start. So the only thing you can do is get up there. You see there? All we can do here is run our blade. See how it goes and it follows? Whether you push forward or go backwards, it follows that line. Now you're basically just doing that. That's quite literally all we're doing. You can go from one end all the way to the other, but the main point is just to keep going back and forth like that. And you do this enough and eventually you'll break through. And when you break through, then obviously your blade goes straight through. Let's pretend that's the hole. And you can then cut down, and you can then also cut perfectly to the corner. And then obviously to attack it from this side, this is an easy cut, straight ahead. Again, we tape up here, but we're always aware of the end of our blade. We don't want to go cutting into the A-pillar. So we cut there, and do this cut first. I recommend this cut first. It's always nicer to have that cut. Then you've got somewhere to end, a nice clean ending, which protects your A-pillar, as I said, again, because you can go down, come up from here and, sorry, you can't see the car, come up from here once you've got a hole in it and cut, and you're avoiding that A-pillar because of that angle. And that's how you cut the Datsun bonnet. So again, we'll spend another 30 seconds or so while I work this side of this bonnet, which is basically what I have to do. And again, while I'm doing this, I'm always conscious of both the end of the blade and this end. And in this case, especially the fore end, the closer end of the blade, because I want to make sure I'm going and putting all the weight with the nose, with the head of the blade, like that. So I'll just keep doing that, see? And eventually I'll put a hole in it. But if I was to go flat, I might forget, and before I know it, I've cut down into my headlight or something, and we don't want that, especially because the example I'm showing you guys, I don't know if you can see it, but we've absolutely nailed it. If you guys are following along and doing it, then we've all nailed it. Well done. Haven't put a single cut into any other panel, and that bonnet is pretty much 100% ready to come out. So again, as I said, I'm not going to bore you as I continue to do this, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to work my blade, especially concentrating mainly on that middle section, so I'm avoiding the ends, and then the blade will eventually work its way through, and then I can cut straight down and cut one way, cut the other way, and Bob's your uncle, or Robert, whatever he prefers. So again, thanks for watching. I apologise that it's taken a bit longer than I thought, but it is quite a detailed process and there's quite a few finicky things involved. The file itself that we mentioned as a necessity obviously comes after the fact. Once you've cut your bonnet out, you want to file any of those flat surfaces both on the sides,